Hi, and welcome to church. My name is Michelle Hopp. I serve as the pastor for the Pointed Inch and the Arlington United Methodist Churches. I hope you have had a great week. We are wrapping up our sermon series on Jesus' reckless love. And today we are going to be considering the importance of valuing the vulnerable, particularly in the area of grieving people, because a lot of us don't like to be around people who are crying and grieving, and we might ask ourselves, well, do I have to actually do that? Comfort the vulnerable, value them? So this will be a fun one for us to explore together. Let's join together in prayer. God of love, we ask for your divine touch upon the lost and the brokenhearted. Comfort those who have been shattered by loss, health problems, betrayal, or disappointment. Mend their wounds and restore their hope. Surround them with a supportive community that uplifts and embraces them in their vulnerability. May we be part of this healing community as you help us to value the vulnerable. Amen. So I want to tell you a little story about this kind of a fun family farm in Virginia, where Pastor Tom Berlin, the author of Restless Love, the book, lives. Well, actually, his church is right down from this farm. So it is called, let me find it here, Frying Pan Farm Park. What a name for a park. It features around 100 farm animals in a setting that is straight out of the 1900s, which would be really interesting to see all the vintage farms and barns and machinery and that type of thing, plus all those cute animals. Well, a few years ago, the farm bought a new Angus young cow, and her name was Hokie. Now, they put her in a barn. They thought they had her in real good, and they had put a wagon in front of her that was 3.5 feet high, thinking there is no way that Hokie would ever think about jumping over a 3.5-foot barrier. Well, she apparently had a sense of adventure, and one day decided to hop over that wagon and go for a little walkabout. Then she walked down the road in front of Frying Pan Farm for about 4 blocks, and then she found the ramp onto, let's see, I can't remember how many, 8 lanes. I was going to say 4, but I knew it was big. An 8-lane interstate highway. She gets on the interstate, just walking along, having her little adventure. She crosses all 4 lanes of traffic, and then she jumps over the divider. Man, this was quite the jumping Angus cow. And now she's walking towards traffic on the interstate until she finally hits another ramp, which is now she's walking against traffic on that too. And finally, a driver is able to kind of scoot her to a place where she can't go anywhere. In the meanwhile, you've got the police, the fire department, and then the employees from the farm all chasing after Hokie. And the farm employees finally got her to, after they put the ramp down on the trailer of the vehicle that they were pulling. I'm not good at trucks and trailers. You get the idea. They want to get her up on it. And so once they did that, she finally said she decided that she'd had enough of this adventure, and she went right back onto the trailer. Now, much like the farm workers and the police and the fire department who pursued Hokie, Jesus pursues people. And I love this parable about Jesus being a shepherd of 100 sheep. And when he knows one is missing and in trouble, he leaves the 99 vulnerable themselves and chases after that one sheep that really needs his help. Our vulnerable neighbors are like sheep, or sometimes like an Angus cow. When they jump over boundaries that were put in place to protect them, Jesus urgently pursues them, meets them at his welcome ramp, and returns them to their beloved community. Throughout his ministry, Jesus pursues vulnerable people, including those who grieve. I love the story of Lazarus. It was Jesus's really good friend. And Jesus was wanting to heal him because he hears that Lazarus is sick. But he doesn't get there in time, and Lazarus dies. And Lazarus' sisters and family are crying and weeping and moaning. They're so upset because he has died. And Jesus, even though he knows he is about to resurrect Lazarus from the dead to restore him to health and life, he joins the grieving people and he cries. When you are grieving, know that Jesus is there with you, comforting you, crying right along with you. Grief is a painful condition. I think of my grief experience after my husband Rob died. It is the most painful thing that I have ever experienced. I felt like I was walking neck deep in water. And then every minute or so, a big wave would then crash over my head, and I'm sputtering and trying to catch my breath, and I finally gain my balance, and then another wave comes over, and another one, and I felt like I was drowning. I couldn't catch my breath. It seemed like the waves of grief would never end. And Gary Rowe, who is a pastor and chaplain who specializes in grief counseling, describes the pain of grief, I really love this, as a grief bus, hitting us and leaving us lying in the middle of the road. And then when it's time to try to get up again, this grief bus hits us again. Rowe also compares grief to a roller coaster that has no time limit and is anything but fun. I don't like roller coasters to begin with, and I can just imagine what it would feel like to be on a roller coaster that you can't get off and you aren't enjoying. Grief hurts. Now, Jesus knows vulnerable, grieving people need love from their neighbors. So in his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Nevertheless, many of us wonder who has to help these grieving people. Does it have to be me? Because really, it can be challenging to help vulnerable people. God commands us to love our neighbors as ourselves, but we tend to feel uncomfortable when we have to help vulnerable people, when we find their situation uncomfortable. Unfortunately, when we avoid these people, we neglect them when they need us the most. I was shocked. I've heard this before from other people, but it happened to me. After my husband died, some of my closest friends I never heard from. They never sent cards. They didn't come and visit again. It was during COVID, but they never checked in on me. I was shocked. The very people that I expected were going to be the people who were there hugging me, holding me, making me casseroles, they were gone. I felt like I was losing both my friends and my husband, and I was so lonely. However, and I get it, some people, they just don't like dealing with death. Others hate to see people cry. So to protect themselves, people sometimes decide they don't have to love mourners. They figure, well, somebody else who's good at it, they'll step in. Somebody better at consoling grieving people. However, as they avoid funerals and crying people, they neglect the very people who need their help. They decide who is seen and who is unseen. Rowe urges us all, your grieving relative, friend, neighbor, or coworker needs you. They're hungry for you to know what they're feeling and experiencing and join them in it. The best thing you can do to help a grieving person is just be there. Just listen. Grieving people already feel so alone and they need you. Please do not withdraw from grieving people. I have discovered how much this hurts. Be willing to be uncomfortable as you make yourself available to those who have suffered a loss. Now, first century Jews had the same problem we have today of who do we decide is seen and who is unseen. They did not understand mental or emotional illness the way we do today, so they thought that anybody who had any kind of abnormal behavior was demon-possessed. That was part of the culture. Physically and mentally ill people and terribly grief-stricken people sometimes were a part of outcasts that were neglected by most people. But guess who pursued them? Jesus. In the Gospel of Mark, this is one of the most intriguing stories to me in the entire Bible. We learn that Jesus crosses the Sea of Galilee with his disciples to a region of Gerasenes to pursue a demon-possessed man who lives among the tombs. You remember this story? The man who is so mentally ill, so disturbed and full of pain that he wanders around in this graveyard naked and screaming and crying, and he was frightening to people. He was strong, he was violent, he was angry, and people even tried to restrain him using chains, which he then broke. So he's walking around swinging these broken chains. And Mark sums up the man's agony this way. He says, night and day in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and cut himself with stones. This man was so tormented. Now, he's also one of the unseen. He belongs to a large group of emotionally unwell people who are deemed unworthy and unlovable. And when he sees Jesus, he starts running towards him, which I'm sure for the disciples, they're getting a little freaked out. They have this man, they've heard all the stories about him, and it's a man that on their own they would have avoided like the plague, right? But they're with Jesus. Jesus came here on purpose to see this man. They know this. And so they figure, oh boy, here comes this guy running towards us. He's tall, he's angry, he's violent, he's swinging these broken chains on his wrists. I'm sure they're wondering, is he going to hurt us? However, when this man reaches Jesus, he falls to his knees and he asks, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Now, Jesus wants his disciples to watch this. He wants them to watch this interchange between him and the man. He knows they have heard the stories about this man's behavior and his cemetery living quarters. And he knows that if they were left to their own devices, they would not come anywhere near him. They wouldn't even be in this region at all. But now they see Jesus loving and valuing him. Jesus asks the man's unclean spirit its name, and it replies, Legion is my name because we are many. This man had many, many things that were tormenting him. Jesus casts it all out, and the townspeople gathered to see this healed, formerly demon-possessed man, and they're amazed to see he looks well. He's fully dressed. He's sitting talking to Jesus. He's happy. For the first time in years, he possesses his right mind. And Jesus pursued this vulnerable man, loved him, and made him whole. In gratitude, the man pleads with Jesus. He said, please, Jesus, let me be your disciple. Let me go with you. Let me help you teach people. But Jesus has a better idea. He gives the man a mission. Jesus says, go home to your own people and tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has shown you mercy. Jesus gives us the same mission. We are to use our pain to bless others. As Proverbs says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Tom Berlin puts it this way. He says, the history and damage of your past, the stuff we hope to disguise, ignore, and never tell anybody about, is exactly what is most likely to enable us to bless somebody else somewhere down the road. So if you have mental illness, you can bless a newly diagnosed person who's scared to death. If you've suffered the pain of grief, you are uniquely positioned to help a grieving person because you know what people are going through, at least to some degree. You know, after my husband's death, I discovered that as I healed and tended my own wounds, I could then help other people bandage theirs. I could offer a level of love and compassion to grieving people that I had never, ever possessed before. I know that I look back at the early funerals I officiated at, and although I was compassionate and kind, I just didn't really get it. And I think I do a much better job now because I really understand what deep grief feels like. Our church member, Jerry Hewer, also wants to use her pain to help others. And last year she lost her partner, and she understands the overwhelming pain of grief. Now she wants to help people who are suffering a loss of their own. And she plans to start a brand new grief support group in our church to help our beloved community. Jerry plans on leading the group, and I'll assist her as she needs me. We as Christians are called to help the vulnerable with the same reckless love that Jesus has. We aren't supposed to avoid the scary tombs and cemeteries where the demon-possessed people live. Of course, that's not what they are now. We understand them to be mentally ill or grieving people, but we cannot avoid them. It's our job to help the vulnerable. And in addition to that, while we can't save the world, we are uniquely qualified to help people endure the pain that we have personally experienced. So here is your mission. First, connect with grieving people. Don't run away from it. Don't avoid the funerals. Don't avoid talking to the person. Don't avoid saying that you're sorry. Don't avoid. That's probably the best thing that you can do. Listen and be willing to enter their pain, even when you are uncomfortable, and you will be. You might even say the wrong thing a time or two. It's okay. Just be there with them. Sit in the middle of the road with them after they are hit by that grief bus one more time. Grieving people need you. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to be present. Don't run away. Second, use your personal pain to help others. This is where you can go into the lane that is best for you to help people. Pursue your vulnerable neighbor who is starting down that same path of pain that you are familiar with, one that you've struggled with. You are going to be uncomfortable, and that is normal, and that is okay. Because after all, Jesus' disciples were uncomfortable and scared when Jesus brought them into the cemetery with that man who needed his help. As you value the vulnerable and help them to heal their own wounds, you can meet them at the welcome ramp. You can actually pull in the trailer and put that ramp down and invite them back on to the vehicle and then bring them home. Help them to heal. Return them to their beloved community. Your friends, co-workers, neighbors, and relatives need you. Amen. And I'd like to send you out into your week with a blessing, a benediction. This week, I encourage you to connect with a grieving person. Listen and be willing to enter their pain, even though you are uncomfortable. At the very least, send a card, bake a casserole, give them a hug, tell them you're sorry, tell them how sorry you are. Just don't avoid them, don't run away. Grieving people need you. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Amen.